You know, when a massive world-spanning sci-fi story decides to just hit the brakes and hold a funeral, it's a tremendous gamble.
Absolutely.
Because usually you tune into this genre expecting giant monsters, collapsing cityscapes, and characters just running for their lives.
Like the adrenaline factor.
Yeah, but what happens when the dust settles, the monsters recede, and all those characters are just left standing in a graveyard, completely shattered by the collateral damage?
I mean, it forces a massive reckoning for the show's entire structure. The writers are essentially shifting the narrative weight from the external thrill of survival to, the very messy internal fallout of grief.
And that is the exact landscape we are navigating with our deep dive today. We're exploring Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, Season 2, Episode 6.
Which carries the very heavy and honestly very appropriate title Requiem.
It really does. And we have a tall stack of recent television recaps, fan theories, and critical reviews to sift through for you today. We're drawing from outlets like Slash Film, Winter is Coming, Prime Timer, and Film Gordon.
There is a lot to cover.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out how Requiem attempts this delicate high wire act. Like, how does it balance profound human grief with mind-bending, reality-breaking sci-fi concepts?
And looking at how deeply divided the critical consensus actually is, we have to ask, does the show actually pull it off?
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, this funeral is the critical starting point because this episode serves as a massive pivot for the entire MonsterVerse timeline.
Yeah, everything changes here.
Exactly. Moving forward, every action taken by the core cast is a direct reaction to the emotional singularity of this episode, which is Hiroshi Randa's death at the hands of Titan X.
Right.
The psychological fallout from that loss drives every single decision, whether it's rational, self-destructive, or scientifically catastrophic.
And the reality of that loss in the present day is just incredibly somber. I mean, think about the visual of this funeral. You have Keiko there,
who hasn't aged a day since the 1950s.
Right. Because of her time trapped in the gravitational distortion of Axis Mundi, she physically looks like a young woman. And she is standing there, burying the grown son she only just reunited with.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. The shadow of his violent demise is just suffocating Cate and Kentaro. It's a remarkably heavy sequence to sit through.
And reviewers largely praised how the show handles this weight. They particularly highlighted a quiet, reflective scene between Cate and Keiko.
The one where they're looking at the stars?
Yes, exactly. They are looking up at the night sky, comparing the light of the long-dead stars they are seeing to their enduring memories of Hiroshi.
It's a gorgeous metaphor.
It really is a classic astrophysical metaphor.
Right.
The light of a star takes millions of years to reach our eyes, meaning we are essentially looking at a ghost.
Right, the visual impact continues long after the source is extinguished.
Precisely. Just as the impact of a life continues long after the person is actually gone.
But intertwined with that grief, the episode finally gives us the answer to a massive mechanical mystery.
Oh, the lost year.
Yeah, this has been hanging over the plot since the first season. We get this jump into a flashback to Skull Island, set about 2 weeks prior to the funeral.
Where Kentaro is quietly sketching Kong from a distance.
Which is such a tense moment. Kong, of course, immediately senses him and growls. It really reinforces the lore that Titans possess an absolute hyper-awareness of their environment.
They know everything happening around them.
Right. But during this quiet bonding moment over a beer, Hiroshi finally explains his infamous lost year.
Because we've spent the entire run of the show wondering why Hiroshi just vanished for over a year following G-Day, the day Godzilla attacked San Francisco.
He left his 2 secret families searching the globe.
And everyone, including Kentaro, assumed Hiroshi just prioritized his obsession with Monarch over his own children.
But the truth is entirely rooted in the bizarre physics of this universe. He wasn't abandoning them at all.
No, he discovered a geographic rift in Alaska, fell in, and was trapped in the subterranean realm of Axis Mundi.
And to him, subjectively, he was only down there for a day or 2. But because of the extreme gravitational forces warping time in that space.
When he finally found a way back up to the surface in Africa, a full year had passed on the outside.
Now, this specific reveal is where the critical reaction sharply divides. Jeremy Mathai's review over at Slash Film points out what he calls a significant structural flaw.
Yeah, he was not a fan of the pacing here.
Not at all. He argues that while this adds great nuance to Hiroshi's character, the pacing of the reveal is immensely frustrating.
Right, because dropping this massive resolution after the character is already dead feels like too little, too late.
Mathai suggests it grinds the narrative momentum to a complete halt, merely to backfill a lingering mystery.
Which is a valid critique for a TV show that needs to keep moving.
Okay, but I want to push back on this a bit. Imagine taking a disastrous weekend camping trip. You get lost in the woods for 2 days, and when you finally walk out, you discover you've missed your child's entire 4th grade year.
That would be devastating.
You can never get that time back. So doesn't revealing this after he dies actually twist the knife in a brilliant way for you as the listener?
How so?
It reframes Hiroshi's whole life, his whole struggle, precisely at the moment when it is permanently too late for his kids to grant him any forgiveness. The timing isn't bad pacing. I mean, it's a deliberate tragedy.
I see where you're coming from. But from a screenwriting perspective, withholding information like that can easily alienate an audience.
You think it feels cheap?
Well, when a writer employs the tragedy of missing information, it needs to propel the living characters forward in a new, active direction. If it just serves to make the audience feel bad about a character who is already off the board,
it's just a bummer.
Exactly. It risks feeling emotionally manipulative rather than structurally sound. However, I will say it does perfectly contextualize the currently fractured state of the Randa family.
Because this fresh grief isn't unifying them at all?
No, it's actively tearing them apart, sending Cate and Kentaro down completely opposite, dangerous paths.
Yeah, let's look at Kentaro first. He is walking a path of pure, self-destructive anger. He is blindly blaming Cate for their father's death, accusing her of just losing control of the situation.
Which is incredibly unfair to her.
Totally. So we see him go out to a bar, drinking heavily, and May tracks him down there.
She's trying to apologize, right?
Yeah, for her past role in the disaster and for previously siding with the tech conglomerate, Apex Cybernetics. But Kentaro, who is just swimming in all this hurt and confusion, entirely misinterprets her pity as romantic interest.
Yeah, it's so hard to watch.
He makes a move, gets firmly rejected, and is just left sitting there completely isolated.
And that isolation makes him the perfect target for corporate exploitation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because while he's sitting there alone, he is approached by a woman named Isabel, played by Amber Midthunder.
Right.
And the context clues pile up very quickly here, revealing her true identity. She is the daughter of Walter Simmons, the ruthless CEO of Apex Cybernetics.
She is a textbook corporate honey trap.
Literally textbook.
But the most compelling part of this dynamic is that Kentaro isn't naive. He knows she's a honey trap sent by Apex. He recognizes exactly what game they're playing.
But he goes along with it anyway.
Right. Because he is so bitter and so deeply desperate for some semblance of control that he calls her and agrees to join their cause. He is consciously choosing the dark path here.
He is. But before he makes that fateful call, the episode pulls a narrative stunt that severely agitated the critics.
Oh, the dream sequence.
Yes, Kentaro wanders out of the bar, into the street, and suddenly finds himself in the middle of a massive, thrilling Godzilla attack. Buildings are violently crumbling. Godzilla is brawling with Titan X in the middle of the city.
And then Kentaro gasps and wakes up. It's the classic multi-minute fake-out dream sequence.
Winter is Coming was particularly ruthless about this sequence. Their review called it the single cheapest of stunts the show has ever pulled.
Wow, they hated it.
They really did. They argued it was a bizarre, deflating creative choice, designed artificially to inject unearned adrenaline into what is fundamentally a slow, contemplative episode.
Yeah, they felt it sucked the life out of Kentaro's subplot by prioritizing cheap visual thrills over genuine psychological drama.
It definitely feels out of place.
It reeks of studio insecurity, honestly. Like a panicked realization in the editing room that they haven't shown a monster in 20 minutes, so they just throw in a dream sequence.
That's very likely what happened.
But let's contrast Kentaro's downward spiral with Cate's trajectory. Because while he is choosing anger and corporate revenge, she is leaning into empathy.
She heads out to the lake house.
Yeah, to process her grief at this serene lake house owned by the disgraced scientist Dr. Suzuki, or Zook.
Right.
She's sitting by the water and notices these abnormal, highly rhythmic ripples moving straight toward her legs.
And this is a crucial scientific breakthrough for the characters. Because the ripples aren't random, they are acoustic vibrations.
Cate and Keiko figure out that Cate has developed an infrasonic connection to Co-Cai.
The creature we know as Titan X.
Exactly. And infrasound consists of these low-frequency sound waves that travel incredibly well through dense mediums like earth and water.
You don't necessarily hear them with your ears.
No, your body feels them as a physical vibration. So Cate realizes she needs to test this connection. She literally straps a series of electrodes to herself and wades into the lake.
Which is insane.
She even quips electricity and water. What could go wrong? But the incredibly dangerous setup works. By using the water as a conductive medium for the infrasound, Keiko is able to record and decipher the specific signals that Titan is broadcasting.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer paradigm shift this causes. When they isolate and play back the audio, Co-Cai doesn't sound like a conqueror or an apex predator or a malicious destroyer.
Not at all.
The acoustic signature matches that of a wounded animal. It is lost, terrified, and desperately broadcasting a search signal for its home.
It's a huge reveal.
It completely subverts the foundational premise of the entire monsterverse. It forces a complete reevaluation, shifting the narrative from a militaristic "how do we kill them" to an ecological "how do we help them find balance."
Okay, picture this. Imagine a terrified, lost bear that accidentally wanders out of the dense woods and onto a busy Los Angeles freeway.
Total chaos.
Exactly. The destruction it causes is going to be immense. Cars crashing, people panicking, infrastructure damaged. But the bear isn't evil.
Right. It doesn't have a vendetta against humanity.
It's just massive, panicked, and entirely out of its natural element. So if the Titans are essentially just victims of our geographical borders, why does the Monarch organization always default to treating them like enemy combatants?
I think because institutional fear is a much easier reflex than scientific understanding.
That makes sense.
When faced with an overwhelming, uncontrollable force, human bureaucracies naturally default to militarized containment.
Shoot first, ask questions later.
Exactly. And that exact institutional reflex, striking out in fear rather than listening, is what brings us to the most controversial character arc of the episode.
Older Lee Shaw.
Yes. Because while Cate is discovering the Titan's innocence, Lee is sprinting in the opposite direction. He reverts completely to a kill-or-be-killed mentality to avenge Hiroshi.
And the critics did not hold back on this storyline. I mean, they uniformly praised Kurt Russell's performance.
He's always great.
Oh, sure. But they noted this shift in Lee's behavior feels incredibly abrupt. Several reviews literally called it an underbaked heel turn.
He basically becomes a secondary antagonist in this episode.
Yeah, he completely ignores Keiko's warnings about the Titan being innocent, and he just begins plotting this rogue, massive operation to weaponize Godzilla against Co-Cai.
Right, and to understand the mechanics of this shift, we have to analyze the 1958 flashback provided in the episode.
The one with Wyatt Russell.
Exactly. We see younger Lee desperately trying to transfer out of the Monarch facility in Arlington, Virginia. He's trying to escape his lingering, complicated romantic feelings for Keiko.
But his commanding officer intercepts the transfer paperwork.
And that commanding officer happens to be his father, Leland Lafayette Shaw X.
And the father is this stern, cold military man who just views monster hunting as a pointless distraction.
Right.
So instead of letting Lee transfer laterally, he tries to send him to Vietnam.
And for some historical context for you listening, the Military Assistance Advisory Group was the early pre-war escalation phase in Vietnam.
His father literally pitches this deployment to Lee by casually stating it might result in some combat experience. He wants to harden his son.
But Lee actively rebels against this. He refuses to go down that explicitly murderous path, and he returns to Keiko at Monarch.
They agree to keep things strictly professional.
Yeah. And the narrative even teases them beginning research into a suspicious Soviet nuclear facility in Kazakhstan.
But the psychological takeaway from 1958 is critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because while Lee outwardly rejected his father's orders, he deeply internalized his father's cold, zero-sum game worldview regarding threats.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Think of Lee's entire psychological arc like a thick rubber band.
Okay.
His whole life, he has been pulling and stretching himself away from his father's toxic military coldness. He worked hard to become protective, supportive, and a surrogate father figure to Hiroshi.
He tried to do better.
He did, but the sheer trauma of Hiroshi's death was like letting go of that rubber band. The snap of that grief caused him to violently recoil right back into his father's foundational mindset.
That's a great way to put it.
So I have to challenge the critics on this. Is this actually bad writing and an unearned heel turn, or is it a brutally realistic depiction of how human beings regress to their worst instincts when they are traumatized?
Well, the clinical data on acute trauma heavily supports your interpretation.
Does it?
Yes. When individuals experience sudden catastrophic loss, especially when they feel responsible, attachment theory shows they often regress to their earliest formed coping mechanisms. So Lee feels he fundamentally failed to protect his surrogate family. He is falling back on the only armor he was ever taught to wear, which is his father's unyielding militarism. He believes humanity have to find a way to survive in a world that no longer belongs to them, and he is willing to risk literally everything to achieve that.
And risk everything he absolutely does. Because Lee's regression pushes him to execute an incredibly dangerous, totally unauthorized experiment.
Right. He teams up with Dr. Suzuki.
Yeah.
And as a quick aside, multiple film critics pointed out that the old man prosthetics and makeup on actor Leo Ashizawa were wildly unconvincing.
Oh, it was rough.
It's completely pulling them out of the tension of the scene.
But bad makeup aside, the scientific mechanics of their plan are terrifying. They head out to a remote location, Mount Osor, and Zook has built an upgraded, time-adjusted Titan phone.
And for context, this is basically a rebuilt, portable version of Project Hourglass.
The disastrous teleportation experiment.
Exactly, the one that tried to map the Hollow Earth portals and ended up ruining Zook's career years ago.
So their goal here is to rip open a spatial portal, ring the Titan frequency, and summon Godzilla to emerge and murder Titan X.
It's essentially using acoustic resonance to shatter a dimensional barrier, much like a singer hitting a specific pitch to shatter a wine glass.
Right. And against the explicit warnings of Cate and Kaiko, they power the machine on.
And almost immediately, the physics of the experiment collapse.
It goes so wrong. The rift they create destabilizes. The gravitational pull becomes so intense it nearly sucks Lee right inside the spatial tear.
Zook barely manages to cut the power to the system just in the nick of time.
And Godzilla doesn't emerge. Nothing comes out of the physical portal. But the sheer output of quantum energy from the machine violently distorts the surrounding fabric of space and time.
Because as they're lying there in the dirt, recovering, the radio crackles to life.
And over the static, older Lee hears a voice broadcasting a distress signal, desperately calling for an extraction from Axis Mundi.
The voice on the radio is Lee Lafayette Shaw III.
Wait,
It is the anguished voice of his younger self, broadcasting from decades in the past.
It's like dialing a random, wrong number on your cell phone today, and the person who picks up on the other end is you, sitting in your living room in 1958, begging for someone to come rescue you. It's wild.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sci-fi implications for the MonsterVerse are absolutely staggering.
Oh, completely.
Up until now, the universe operated on a model where time moved at different speeds, like the time dilation Hiroshi experienced. But this radio transmission confirms that the past and present timelines can now actively overlap and communicate.
Two versions of Lee Shaw now exist and are interacting across a quantum bridge.
It fundamentally rewrites the physical rules of reality for this show.
But wait, if you can suddenly communicate across time, doesn't that immediately lower the narrative stakes?
How do you mean?
Well, if older Lee can just grab a radio and call the past to warn his younger self, or warn Hiroshi to stay away from a specific rift, does death even matter anymore in this universe? Like, if history can be casually rewritten with a phone call, why should we ever worry about a character being in physical danger?
You're touching on the classic grandfather paradox there.
Yeah.
And the show's going to have to establish strict boundaries very quickly.
Right.
Because if cross-time communication is easy, the stakes absolutely vanish. However, if the cost of that communication is catastrophic,
Like it breaks reality.
exactly. Say,
Okay.
changing the past actively destabilizes the present, causing timeline collapse or creating geographic anomalies, then the stakes are actually higher than ever.
It shifts the tension entirely.
Yes, from will this specific character survive a monster attack, to will the fabric of the universe survive human hubris?
So what does this all mean? Requiem uses the immense gravity of a funeral to completely scatter its characters across the board.
In every direction.
The trauma of losing Hiroshi sends Cate towards radical empathy, using infrasound to realize these giant monsters are just lost animals.
Right.
It sends Kentaro straight into the arms of a toxic corporate honey trap out of a desperate need for revenge. And it sends Lee Shaw spiraling into a disastrous, time-breaking scientific hubris that literally connects him face to face with his own past.
It is an episode exploring how grief doesn't just break human hearts. I mean, in the Monsterverse, the sheer weight of it apparently possesses enough energy to break the space-time continuum.
That leaves us with one final lingering thought for you to mull over. We know time dilation in Axis Mundi allows a few days to equal a whole year on the surface.
Right, the lost year.
And now we've seen that quantum energy can allow radio signals to cross decades instantly. But what about the Titans?
The monsters themselves.
Yeah, they travel through these rifts naturally. It is their biological habitat. So what if the Titans don't experience time linearly at all?
Oh, that's interesting.
What if, to a creature like Godzilla or Co-Cai, the ancient past, the year 1958, and the modern day are all happening at the exact same moment?
Everything everywhere all at once.
Exactly. And what if that's why they're so lost, thrashing around in our world, trying to navigate a timeline they experience all at once?
Well, if that hypothesis holds, they aren't just displaced geographically, they are profoundly displaced temporally.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep your ears open for the next set of signals.